What is up, people? This is Addy Ads, Attic and the Skywalker. I am doing a book review today on this video. It's the 24th September 2020, and we are reviewing a book by an author. His name is Shaun Attwood. He is one of my favorite authors as far as nonfiction true crime authors. He's probably my favorite true crime author that is a modern author. He is one of my favorite YouTubers as well. So that is awesome. And I actually read this book earlier this year. It's been a minute, and this is probably the fastest I've ever read a book from Shaun Attwood. And I actually read it out of order. This book is Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies, from the boys on the track to Jeffrey Epstein, the infamous, notorious for raping children, extortion, blue-collar crime on a level never before seen. Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. He has a great book here. Shaun Attwood does. Last chapter is Jeffrey Epstein, and that's the reason I skipped around. Was actually because I was wanting to get to the Epstein information first, and this is a book that you can skip around if you want, or you can read it straight. Either way, I mean, the chapters are real nice because he doesn't. He goes for I think breadth over depth here, which I think is really nice if you're a little ADHD or if you're new on these topics. You maybe don't want to get into deeply into the weeds with some of them, but he gives you just enough so you kind of know what's going on, right? So chapter 1 is the boys on the tracks. 2 boys found in Arkansas dead on some railroad tracks. 16-year-old Kevin Ives, 17-year-old Don Henry. The reason that they died, according to the autopsy report from the state, was that they got so high on marijuana that they decided to lie down next to each other, parallel, and kill themselves via railroad crossing on a train. And who was the governor in Arkansas during that time? It was Mr. Billy Bob, Billward Clinton. Chapter 2, he talks about Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, and his upbringing and his rise and fall as well in California. Gary Webb, if anybody has seen the movie with what's his name, Jeremy Renner, that journalist that Jeremy Renner plays is Gary Webb, who was found killed in a, well, suicided. Well, what's the word? I don't even know what he was found. We were told he killed himself, and I believe he had 2 bullet holes to the back of his head when he was found. Kill the Messenger is that film. I actually really enjoyed that film. Kill the Messenger. I recommend people check it out. But chapter 3 is about that same story with Gary Webb and uncovering the CIA's funding of the Contras in Nicaragua as they were fighting the communists who were in control there at the time. And Kiki Camarena is another one he mentions. I actually mentioned Kiki Camarena in my recent chat with Major Jeffrey Prather from the Prather Point, ex-DEA, ex-DIA, ex-military intelligence. Check that chat out. We had a great chat. So chapter 4 goes on Kiki Camarena's story a little bit. Chapter 6 just goes back to the witnesses of the tracks murders. Yeah, and then chapter 7 moves again, right-wing death squads financed by cocaine. And chapter 8 is by one historical figure that I actually did a skywalking on. Klaus Barbie, Nazi war criminal, head of the SD in Lyon, France during World War II, the Butcher of Lyon. This dude was a sick, sadistic psychopath, just crazy. He fled to, I want to say Argentina and then Chile or Peru. I want to say Peru. He got extradited back to France, where he died after about 4 years in incarceration at like the age of 96 or something like that. Really sad story insofar as he didn't really pay for his crimes, was never repentant for them. And, he talks about Klaus Barbie's ties to our own intelligence. So Shaun really goes breadth of history here. World War II, 1970s, 80s, CIA, 90s, drug dealing as well, and up to the 2000s and today. So there's just some quotes I wanted to share. I like to highlight stuff while I'm reading. So let's find a good one. According to Judge Jim Gray, President George W. Bush, who pretty much acknowledged while he was young and irresponsible and a playboy, used cocaine, and then he was governor of Texas, signed legislation mandating anyone that uses cocaine must go to jail, minimum of 180 days. It's beyond hypocrisy. And then Shaun writes about an interview he did where he said, it's the people that have voted for America at the state level that have got the ball rolling over the world presently. And that's not the U.S. federal government, which has maintained weed as a Schedule I substance, more harmful than coke and crystal meth, with no medicinal value whatsoever. If you look at the Partnership for a Drug-Free America that's financed by alcohol, tobacco, and big pharma, the politicians are in a deal with these big corporations to try and hold the floodwater back. But the floodwater is getting stronger every single day because politicians can't go up against families who've got sick kids or having hundreds of seizures a month and can go into a coma and die, and all the pharmaceutical pills in the world won't stop it, but they get on cannabis oil. It completely stops it, minimizes it, and can save their lives. Like Charlotte Figi in America, or Figi, that case has been used now across states for medicinal use. So it's at the state level that the people, we, the shrimp folk of the United States of America, are doing something about this. He talks about Johnny Gosch and the Johnny Gosch kidnapping, which I will do a review actually of a documentary I saw with Nick Bryant interviewed about the Johnny Gosch kidnapping. But Mrs. Gosch, there's something you don't understand. The other family are very wealthy. This is a quote. Speaking to Mrs. Gosch, something you don't understand. The other family are very wealthy. They're very prominent in Des Moines. We had to search for their son because they are more prominent people than you are. So I wanted to share that quote from this writing. The Big White Lie, the CIA, and the Cocaine/Crack Epidemic by, who's that, Mike something. Anyways, I gave the title. I think I might have that on my Goodreads to read list already. Okay, another one I wanted to share. This is in chapter 16, where Shaun talks about medicinal cannabis as a whole, just the whole concept of it. And Sir William Osler, a Canadian physician. Actually, I'm going to keep this one on. Canadian physician. His name is William Osler, has been described as the father of modern medicine. He wrote the first textbook of internal medicine, which described cannabis as the most effective medication for the treatment of migraine headaches. Experiments in 1949, 4 years after the end of World War II, demonstrated its use in treating epilepsy, people with Crohn's disease, were able to stop using steroids and other medication when treated with cannabis. They had less abdominal pain and diarrhea. Reduces anxiety for people with Alzheimer's and muscle spasms for people with Parkinson's disease. With PTSD, it's useful for reducing fearful memories. The Israelis and the Croatian government give troops cannabis to treat PTSD. With arthritis, a topical application reduces pain. Some people have claimed that cannabis oil has cured their cancer. Is this, this is crazy, guys. Cannabis. So he's got a whole chapter on cannabis, does Shaun Attwood. Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller wanted to eliminate herbal treatments, including cannabis, because they were bankrolling the fledgling pharmaceutical industry. They didn't want people growing cheap medicine such as cannabis in their own backyards. They wanted people to buy drugs created in laboratories instead of natural remedies. These business leaders brought their industries, synthetic textiles, oil, pharmaceuticals, plastics, and its derivatives into an alliance against cannabis. Liquor distilleries pitched in too, because they viewed cannabis as competition. Fortunately for the business leaders, the banker Andrew W. Mellon, namesake Carnegie Mellon University, was the Secretary of the Treasury for the U.S. federal government. In 1930, he appointed his future son-in-law, Harry Anslinger, a law and order evangelist, to head the Bureau of Narcotics. Harry's heavy-handed attempts to stop people from drinking during Prohibition hadn't gone so well. His department was facing budget cuts, and his agents were idle. They needed a new enemy to declare war on. And that enemy, of course, was cannabis. And the earliest lobbying to make cannabis illegal actually came from the pharmaceutical societies of the 1860s, who wanted it to be categorized as a poison so they could eliminate it from their competition. 1860s. So we're talking this time of the Civil War was the earliest time that we're seeing this kind of blackballing of the entire medicine of cannabis. And thank you for Tehran for pitching in. Rick Simpson, huge advocate for the use of medicinal marijuana, medicinal cannabis. And I'm going to go into Mr. Simpson here. In a remote Canadian town called Macon, M-A-C-C-A-N, in Nova Scotia, Rick Simpson stumbled upon the medicinal use of cannabis and became a leading advocate. He was born in 1949 when cancer was rare. In 1969, his 22-year-old cousin was diagnosed with it. So at this point, he is 20 years old. Having never heard of anyone so young getting cancer, he wondered if it were a misdiagnosis. But after an agonizing 3 years, his cousin died. It was the first person he knew whom cancer had killed. 3 years later, he heard a radio broadcast about an active ingredient in cannabis called THC killing cancer cells, but he didn't think much about it. So that is the opening paragraph to chapter 16, Medicinal Cannabis, where Shaun Attwood talks about the history of cannabis, how it has been blackballed, starting as early as the 1860s by various overlapping and similar industries. Presidential drug lords, users, and hypocrites is chapter 17. And this is some mind-blowing stuff about President Roosevelt, FDR. Some say he's the greatest president we've ever had. Other presidents that are in that conversation: Abraham Lincoln, Dwight Eisenhower, George Washington, just a few to name. But President Roosevelt signed today a bill to curb traffic in the narcotic marijuana through heavy taxes on transactions. New York Times, August 3rd, 1937. The president who signed the Marijuana Act of 1937, which destroyed the hemp industry and criminalized even the medicinal use of cannabis, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, aka FDR, whose wealth was derived from his grandfather's opium trafficking. Since the 7th century, the Chinese had been using medicinal opium. Demand increased in the 1700s due to the popularity of smoking it with tobacco. As it devastated its users, the Chinese banned opium importation in 1729 and 1799. But the British government was only just getting started. In 1800, China imported 4,500 chests of opium, each containing 65.3 kilograms, which is about 140 pounds or so. 142 pounds, somewhere in there. In 1838, on the eve of the First Opium War, the amount was 40,000 chests, which surged to 70,000 by 1858, just 20 years later, or 4,500 tons, making Queen Victoria, the biggest drug lord in the world. Queen Victoria, growing opium in places like Bengal and shipping it to over 10 million addicts in China because the British Empire's most profitable business venture, generating about 20% of the government's revenues. The addicts named the drug Jesus Opium after the white Christian sailors who peddled it from devil's ships. And just one more paragraph here on FDR. Only 20 years old, Warren Delano, the grandfather of future President Roosevelt, sailed to China and joined the Christian smugglers on the Pearl River Delta, who sold opium under the cover of darkness. Delano wrote home that opium had an unhappy effect on the malnourished addicts, but he justified his dealings with statements like, "As a merchant, I insist it has been fair, honorable, and legitimate." He compared it to the importation of alcohol to America. A decade later, he was so wealthy, he returned to America before the First Opium War. Among the New York's elite, he was considered one of the most eligible bachelors. Warren Delano, that would be Franklin Roosevelt's grandfather. Jeffrey Epstein is the final chapter, as I said. Chapter 20, the second to last chapter, penultimate chapter. Chapter 21 is Gary, Rick, and Linda. So we talked about Gary Webb, I'm guessing Rick Ross, and Linda, who is another journalist, I believe. Again, I read this earlier this year, so like, for example, when Kiki Camarena was mentioned in my interview with Prather, Linda Ives. So the mom of one of the boys who was found on the train tracks, one of the boys on the tracks, mom, Linda Ives, Gary Webb, Rick Ross. Kiki Camarena was mentioned in my interview with Jeffrey Prather, and I actually didn't link it to the book. So, but it's a great book. I read it out of order. You can read it out of order, in order, depending on, maybe you want to just read a book or a chapter on Gary Webb or about CIA cocaine pilots. He talks about SEAL a bit, medicinal cannabis, right-wing death squad, Nazi multimillionaire mass murderer and trafficker. Whatever floats your boat. Otherwise, I'd just recommend people read the whole thing. I've put Shaun Attwood's links in the description box below. Go help him out with some purchases of the book. It's a pretty cheap book. I think it's like $10 on Amazon. You can get it. Amazon Prime, $10-15, depending on where you live. And go give him a sub on YouTube as well. Shaun Attwood, Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies from the Boys on the Tracks to Jeffrey Epstein, War on Drugs, Clinton Body Count, # Clinton Body Count. This is Addy Ads, Anakin Skywalker, YouTube's chosen one, coming to you live from the Shrimp Castle in Buffalo, New York. This has been a book review from one of my favorite nonfiction authors, Shaun Attwood. I hope you enjoyed this. I would recommend this book to anybody who's interested in true crime. Jeffrey Epstein, people who are into the Epstein saga, the Ghislaine Maxwell saga, CIA Conspiracies. It says it right in the title. History on the Bushes, the history on the Clintons a bit. history of medicinal cannabis as well, and other stuff you didn't know about American history. Any of this stuff, I'd recommend people give this book a buy. Help Shaun out on the Amazon charts and add it to your library. All my book lovers out there, you got another nice book suggestion to add to your library. There you go. Stay frosty, folks.